What if I told you there was a war in this country, but it didn't use guns, no bombs, no blood, just paperwork, hospitals, judges, quiet decisions made behind closed doors? Now, I hope you're sitting down because this one is heavy and you're gonna need a minute to process it. And this ain't no rumor, this ain't no conspiracy. This actually happened. Let's go back to 1927. So, Babe Ruth was knocking home runs out the park. He hit 60 that year. The Yankees were dominating baseball. Now, Louis Armstrong was changing music forever. Black folks were doing everything we could to build a life in a country that didn't want us to have one. But while we were dancing, dreaming, and trying to survive, the Supreme Court was making it legal to take our futures away. And yes, this is the same Supreme Court that now claims to care so much about protecting life. Yeah, that one. Back then, they said it was perfectly fine to sterilize people. No consent, no explanation. They decided who should have kids and who shouldn't. So I just want y'all to sit with that for a minute because it's definitely given hypocrisy. But they called it eugenics. And that's just a fancy word for human breeding. They were trying to improve the population by getting rid of anybody they didn't think fit. And they were even saying it loud. They were trying to create the Nordic race. So let's break that down because they weren't just targeting black folks and they weren't treating all white folks the same either. When they said Nordic, they meant blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin, tall, Northern European, Swedish, German, Norwegian. So let me say this loud and clear. If you're one of those people in the comments who doesn't like black people and thinks this was a good idea, I really hope you have crystal blue eyes and blonde hair, and so does everybody in your family, because if not, you wouldn't have been included either. Irish, Italian, Jewish, Polish, Eastern European, y'all were not part of the ideal race. You'd have been sterilized right along with the rest of us. That's how deep this was. They decided what they wanted the future to look like, and then passed laws to make it happen. And y'all gotta stay to the end because I really want y'all to see what these folks look like. It's gonna blow your mind. So back to the story. Just like people breed dogs to get a certain look or temperament, that's what this country was doing, but to people. And one of the biggest tools they use, IQ tests. This is where IQ testing started. And no, IQ doesn't measure how smart you are. It measures how well you fit into their idea of what smart looks like. And let's not forget, most black folks back then weren't even allowed to get a real education. So how do you give someone a test they were never prepared for and then punish them for not doing well? These tests weren't multiple choice. They were open-ended, and there was no partial credit. And whoever graded it got to decide what was right. For example, they might ask you something like, what do an orange and a banana have in common? Now you might say, they both grow on trees, or you can eat both, or they're sweet. But unless you said exactly they belong in the category of fruit, it was wrong. And let me give y'all a real life story. I did well in school. I've got degrees, college, masters, so I know I'm smart. But one day I was working at Target. This man came in and he asked, where are the colanders? Y'all, I had no idea what that was. I stood there looking around like, I think they just moved it. Let me go find out. Because in my house, my mom ain't never said, go get the colander. She said, go get that strainer out the sink. So in that moment, I probably looked slow, but I wasn't. That word just wasn't used in my house. It wasn't in my world. And that's the point. These tests weren't about your actual knowledge or your ability to think. They were about how well you could match the test writer's world. They made the test for who they wanted to pass it. Ask any teacher or any parent helping their kid with their homework. You may see something and we'll say bucket, but the answer they're looking for is pail. Now your child got it wrong, but they knew exactly what it was. So again, it's not about intelligence, it's about access. And let's be real, this wasn't just about race either. They also targeted people who had health conditions. So someone with autism, ADHD, epilepsy, developmental disabilities, or even depression. You were labeled unfit. It didn't matter if you were living a full life, didn't matter if you had goals, dreams, or a family. They decided you were undesirable based on what was in your medical file. And let's be honest, with today's statistics, almost everybody you know has a diagnosis of something. So ask yourself, how many of your friends, cousins, or children, or maybe even you, would have been on that list? Now I want you to picture this. You go to the doctor for something simple. You trust the system, you trust your doctor, and you leave that office never able to have children again. Why? Because your hair was too dark, or because you had a seizure when you were little, because your eyes were brown, because your nose was too big, because you had tubes in your ears as a child, or because your family said strainer instead of a colander. And there's no explanation, no apology, just gone. Now imagine that was you, and I want y'all to hear me loud and clear when I say this. Just comply. Yeah, that word y'all love to throw around. They should have just complied. Just follow the rules. But what happens when the rules are wrong? What happens when the law itself is the problem? What happens when compliance still gets you violated? Because that's exactly what happened. And just in case you think this was some old timey 1920s thing, let me stop you right there. The last known forced sterilization in the US happened in 1981. Yeah, you heard me right. 1981. That's barely a generation ago. Some of y'all watching this video were already born. Some of y'all had kids back then. And the wildest part, some states still have eugenics laws on the books. They might not be using them, but they never took them off. They're just sitting there, quiet, legal, and ready if anybody ever wants to use them again. And don't get it twisted, just because they stopped calling it eugenics doesn't mean they stopped doing it. A few years ago, right here in the US, women in ICE detention centers were being sterilized without their consent. They went in for basic care and came out unable to have children. No explanation, no paperwork, just gone. Same playbook, new setting. And see, not only were the people who pushed this movement racist, hateful, and dangerous, but boy, were they delusional. And you know me, I had to go look them up. Because if you're out here trying to design the whole future of the human race, I want to see what you look like. And when I tell y'all, God forgive me, I'm not trying to talk about nobody, grandma and grandpa, but come on now. These were the people trying to design the race? Be serious. These were the people deciding who was fit to reproduce, who got to have babies, and who should be erased. That ain't science. That's supremacy. That's delusion. And that's danger. And just so we're clear, this wasn't some small thing. They admitted to over 60,000 people being sterilized in the US, 20,000 in California alone. And that's just what they're claiming. We already know that they did it in poor clinics, jails, mental institutions, to people who didn't have lawyers or paperwork or anyone fighting for them, people who couldn't even tell their story. They weren't just trying to erase history, they were trying to erase us. And that's why it's important that we tell our own story, because if we don't tell it, we leave it up to them. And they'll tell it the way they want to tell it, clean it up, water it down, flip the villain into the hero. And what's the rule? The only thing that gets remembered is what gets written down. So we're writing it down, we're saying it loud, and we're putting it on record. We're telling it, and we're going to keep telling it until our version, the true version, gets out and stays out. So remember, comment, like, and share to keep the story alive, and subscribe for more stories that they don't put in your textbook. Peace. Dang, this thing was almost 10 minutes. Lord, thank y'all for sticking with me. Hope y'all learned something.